There's 195 countries in the world today. Every one of them has an immigration policy. No country allows for people to become residents or citizens without first meeting some requirements. Over the past year or so, the immigration policy of the United States has been debated almost non-stop, but I haven't heard anyone make comparisons with any other nation's policies. I find that a bit odd considering most laws and policies are copies of laws that are successful in other places. Politicians aren't usually creative thinkers, they're plagiarizers. They just copy and edit policies that seem to be working in other places. In fact, U.S. immigration policy is just that, a copy. Beginning with the countries that I've personally visited, I decided to take a look at what their policies are. What's different, what's the same, and what should the policy be? The first country on my list is the United States of America. I was born in the U.S. a really long time ago, and I spent quite a lot of time there. For me, becoming a U.S. citizen was simple, but if I hadn't been born there, becoming a citizen wouldn't be easy. According to USA.gov, to become a U.S. citizen, a person must be 18 years of age at the time they apply for naturalization. They have to have been a permanent resident with a green card for at least 5 years. They have to demonstrate that they've been in the country continuously half the time, 30 months out of 60. They have to show that they've lived in their area where they're applying for at least 3 months. They have to be of good moral character. They have to demonstrate an attachment to the principles and ideals of the U.S. Constitution. They have to be able to read, write, and speak basic English and have a basic understanding of U.S. history and government. And they have to take an oath of allegiance to the United States.
To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's an honor and a privilege to call you a fellow citizen of the United States of America. This is now officially your country, your home to protect, to defend, and to serve through active and engaged citizenship. Together, we are a nation united not by any one culture or ethnicity or ideology, but by the principles of opportunity, equality, and liberty that are enshrined in our founding documents. Today marks a very special day in your life. You've traveled a long path to get here. You've sworn a solemn oath to this country, and now you have all the rights of citizenship. With the privileges of citizenship, though, come great responsibilities. And so I ask that you use your freedoms and your talents to contribute to the good of our nation and the world. Always remember that in America, no dream is impossible. Like the millions of immigrants who have come before you, you have the opportunity to enrich this country through your contributions to civic society, business, culture, and your community. You can help write the next great chapter in our American story. And together we can keep the beacon that is America burning bright for all the world to see. I am proud to welcome you as a new citizen of this country. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.
The first time I ever left the United States, I was about 8 years old, and my family went on a vacation to Canada. That's a thing people used to do, get in a car and go somewhere. I don't know why we went to Canada, of all places. I remember we saw the waterfall, and my brother showed me a barrel with straps inside that someone had modified to go over Niagara Falls. Of course, they died in that barrel. The rest of the trip is just a hazy memory. I've never been compelled to return to Canada, but if I wanted to, I could probably become a Canadian citizen. The citizenship requirements aren't much different than the U.S. A little more complicated. Canada has 2 official languages, English and French. You have to demonstrate that you can speak, understand, read, and write at least one of those languages to get citizenship. You have to be a permanent resident in Canada for 6 years before you can apply for full citizenship. There's a few other details where Canada differs from the U.S., but for the most part, their immigration policy is the same. My father was an overseas contractor. When I was 15 years old, my mother and I went to live with him so he wouldn't have to make so many trips back and forth. To get to Dad's house, we had to take a really long flight that had a layover in London, England. We landed at Heathrow Airport and went to the Sheraton Skyline Hotel, where they gave me my own room. That might not seem like a big deal to some people, but in 1977, it was a big deal to me. I ordered room service and they brought me beer. Had we stayed in Great Britain, we could have become naturalized citizens after 5 years of legal permanent residency there and satisfying mostly the same requirements the U.S. has, including the basic language skills and being a person of good character. After our very short stay in London, England, Mom and I boarded a British Airways flight to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where my father worked and lived. Since Riyadh wouldn't have an international airport for another 5 years, we landed at the Riyadh Air Base because that's where planes landed in the 1970s. Everything seemed strange. The only time I had ever seen people dressed like this was on a TV show called I Dream a Genie. One thing that caught my attention right away was that the company my dad worked for had a different name in Saudi Arabia. In the U.S., it was called Carlson Corporation, but in the kingdom, it was Carlson Al Sadia. My dad told me that Americans can't own anything in Saudi Arabia, and in order to do business there, they had to have a Saudi partner. So I thought, what about becoming a Saudi citizen so foreign companies would pay me to use my name on their business? And the short answer is, you can't do that. The only way a person not born in Saudi Arabia to Saudi parents can become a citizen is to get married to a Saudi and be a Muslim, and that doesn't guarantee citizenship, and it's unlikely that such a person would be naturalized, but it is possible under Saudi law. Children of foreigners born in Saudi Arabia do not have Saudi citizenship, and they automatically assume the nationality of their parents. After Saudi Arabia, I didn't travel outside the U.S. again until January of 2009, when I went on a 5-day trip to Costa Rica with a friend. Costa Rica is a beautiful country in Central America that's a short 3-hour flight from Miami. It's long been a popular tourist destination because of its beautiful scenery, beaches, culture, and active nightlife. Like Saudi Arabia, Costa Rica doesn't really do the naturalized citizen thing, but unlike Saudi Arabia, they do allow foreigners to become permanent residents. They offer 3 different pathways to becoming a permanent resident: money, a little more money, or a lot more money. Basically, a retired person can show they get a pension or Social Security from the U.S. that's at least $600 a month for life. They can pay a small fee, satisfy some minor requirements like paperwork, and become a permanent resident of Costa Rica. A person who isn't retired and on Social Security can do the same thing if they can show a guaranteed income of $1,000 per month for at least 5 years from something like a trust fund or some other verified financial instrument. The third option grants residency to those who invest in a business with a government-approved organization. $50,000 invested in a field like tourism or export, or $100,000 in reforestation, or $200,000 in some other type of business. But still, you're not a citizen, and you cannot vote in the presidential election. After returning from Costa Rica, I was offered a job working overseas. The U.S. economy at the time was a tragedy of cascading failures, and my personal economy wasn't looking any better. So I accepted the offer, and in October, I was landing at the Dubai International Airport for the first time. Dubai is a city of contradictions and confusion. It's one of 7 emirates that make up the United Arab Emirates, which is right next to Saudi Arabia. An emirate is a place that is governed by an emir. An emir is an Arab ruler, a king, if you will. Back in 1971, 7 small kingdoms got together and formed a federation. Each of the 7 has its own emir, and one of those 7 emirs is the president of the federation. Dubai is a modern city where people from all over the world peacefully coexist. People from every culture and religion come together, set aside their differences, and join forces in a single shared interest: money. Lots and lots of money. Since the 1930s, these guys have been pulling about 30 million barrels of oil out of the ground every single day at a cost of no more than $9 a barrel. And in 2008, the U.S. was happily paying more than $140 a barrel for it. All that money gets shared with the citizens of the UAE. They have arguably the highest quality health care in the world, and it's free. They pay no taxes. They're given free land. They go to universities anywhere in the world free. Even their fuel is subsidized. So you won't be shocked to learn that they aren't making any new citizens out of foreigners. In fact, if a natural-born Emirati woman has a baby in the UAE, but the father isn't Emirati, the kid is not automatically a citizen. That baby has to wait 18 years and apply for citizenship, and there's a very good chance it'll be denied. As for foreigners, The first qualification for citizenship is that you've legally lived in the UAE for 30 years. And if you have, there's a list of other qualifications that make it effectively impossible to become a UAE citizen. One is that you speak fluent Arabic. Have you ever tried to learn Arabic? I have. It's not easy. After getting what I needed for my new job, I left Dubai on a charter flight headed to Iraq. Commercial airlines like Delta and British Airways weren't flying into Baghdad in 2009. Skylink out of B, however, they'll go anywhere. Just don't expect them to vacuum the planes or clean their bathrooms. October 15, 2009, Baghdad International Airport wasn't very busy. There weren't many flights coming and going since the U.S. military doesn't need to use passports in commercial airports. They can fly in and out of military bases. And things were less than perfect in the Iraqi government at the time, and they weren't issuing any visas. They just stamped my passport and welcomed me to Baghdad. It was a few months later that I was given a one-year emergency visa, which I was told is a requirement if I want to continue to live and work in Iraq. But Iraq has one of the simplest immigration processes. Just live legally within Iraqi borders for 20 years and don't be Israeli, and they'll make you a citizen. On my way out of Iraq, I stopped for 3 days in Amsterdam. Amsterdam is the capital of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and it's a beautiful city with an interesting history and a lot of wonderful sights to see. I didn't see any of those sights because I spent my entire time there in a place known as the Red Light District, but that doesn't mean I haven't learned anything about the Netherlands. Apart from learning that everything important in Amsterdam is within walking distance of Stone's Cafe, I also learned that becoming a naturalized citizen in the Netherlands is very similar to the process in the U.S. Most of the rules are the same. You must first obtain legal residency and maintain it for 5 years before applying for citizenship. You have to demonstrate that you are sufficiently integrated. You have to show that you can read, write, speak, and understand the Dutch language. One difference is that the Netherlands requires that you renounce your current nationality. They don't allow dual citizenship. When I left Amsterdam, I went back to the U.S. for a week or so and then to Panama for a short time. Panama is the southernmost country in Central America, and it was once part of Colombia. In 1903, the U.S. wanted to build a canal across Panama to reduce the distance cargo ships would need to travel. In order to do that, they needed to enter into a treaty with Colombia. The U.S. offered Colombia $10 million plus $250,000 a year for the use of a 52-mile section of Panama. That's about a quarter of the actual value according to U.S. government estimates. Colombia wanted to negotiate the amount, but the U.S. refused.
It's been called one of the 7 wonders of the modern world. A man-made waterway, 50 miles long, that forever altered the face of the earth.
Because Panama had previously tried and failed to secede from Colombia, and a new Panamanian uprising was just getting started, U.S. President Roosevelt decided to support Panama's secession from Colombia by sending the U.S. military. The warship USS Nashville deployed American troops and declared Panama an independent nation. Panama won independence from Colombia on November 3, 1903, allowing for the construction of the canal, and the U.S. pledged to build, maintain, operate, and defend the canal forever, as well as guarantee Panama's continued independence. Panama is one of, if not the, easiest countries to obtain citizenship. In 2012, they passed a law to encourage people to move there. They have a simple one-page application, and that, combined with proof of a deposit at a Panamanian bank of at least $5,000, will get you permanent residency status. If you maintain legal residency for 5 years, you can get citizenship. It's simple, easy, and a lot of people have done it. Colombia was the next country I went to. While I was there, I went through the immigration process and acquired residency status. Having Colombia's version of our green card allows me to work or conduct business, own property, and use a Colombian bank. It's also the first step to citizenship. The process for becoming a Colombian citizen is the same as other countries. You have to be a legal resident for 5 years, and Colombia requires proof that you've been working and paying taxes. To become a Colombiano, you'll have to pass a test on Colombian history, geography, and the Constitution. The test is given verbally in Spanish. Debes responder todas las preguntas en español. The highest altitude international airport in the world is just outside of La Paz, Bolivia, in a town called El Alto. When I arrived there in October of 2016, the first thing I learned about Bolivia was that it's one of only 3 South American countries that requires U.S. citizens to get a visa prior to arrival. Bolivian officials aren't very friendly to gringos entering their country without a good reason for being there and without the required visa. They greeted my Colombian traveling companion with big smiles and warm welcomes, giving her suggestions about things to see in Bolivia and chatting her up about her life in Colombia. But with me, they were very straightforward and to the point with nothing more than yes or no answers to my questions. But I can understand where their attitude comes from. For a long time, Contra-Narco forces led and funded by the U.S. terrorized Bolivian farmers and waged a violent drug war across the country until the Bolivian people elected a left-wing socialist named Evo Morales, the former head of the Coca Growers Union, as president of Bolivia in 2005. As president, Morales expelled the U.S. ambassador, accusing him of conspiring against the Bolivian government. He also kicked out the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, effectively ending the drug war in Bolivia. Then in 2013, he expelled USAID, accusing it of seeking to conspire against the Bolivian people and government. At the UN General Assembly in 2014, Morales called Barack Obama an imperialist. The U.S. has a long and contentious history of interactions with Bolivia. People in the U.S. don't often hear about their government's activities in Bolivia, but it's common knowledge in La Paz, so I can understand why they might treat me with suspicion and maybe even a little contempt. It doesn't detract from the fact that La Paz, Bolivia, is a unique and beautiful place. Getting citizenship in Bolivia requires that you enter the country on a visa specifically for the purpose of applying for permanent residency. Once there, you can apply for a 2-year permanent resident visa, and then after living in Bolivia legally for 2 years, you can apply for citizenship. Every step of the process requires applications, interviews, and payment, but Bolivia grants citizenship to foreigners all the time. Even Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and Etta Place had Bolivian citizenship.
You get a lot more for your money in Bolivia. I checked on it. All Bolivia can't look like this.
How do you know? This might be the garden spot of the whole country. People may travel hundreds of miles just to get to this spot where we're standing now. This might be the Atlantic City, New Jersey of all Bolivia, for all you know.
When I left Bolivia, I went directly to Lima, Peru. That's a good thing because while Bolivia is an awesome place, Bolivian food is terrible, and the food in Peru is the best in the world. Yeah. Unfortunately, the food and the beautiful scenery are the only good things about Lima, Peru. Without going into too much detail, I'll just say that of every place I've been in my life, Peru stands out as the one I would most avoid returning to. One thing that seems to attract people to Peru is the ease with which someone can get and maintain residency status there. It only takes 2 years of living in Peru to be able to apply for citizenship, but you can live there as long as you like without being a citizen, just by renewing your immigrant visa every 2 years. Either way, you do have to learn the Spanish language, as well as some Peruvian history and culture. A lot of people from my generation have at some point in their lives been sitting around with nothing to do when a friend mentions some place or person they haven't seen in a long time because they're far away. And suddenly, a spontaneous road trip is born and an adventure begins. That's how my trip to Venezuela began. I was in Bogota, Colombia. I had a car, I had a friend. We had time on our hands. We decided to drive to a small Colombian town called Arequipa along the eastern border with Venezuela to visit my friend's father, whom she hadn't seen in a couple of years. Arequipa, Colombia is separated from La Victoria, Venezuela by the narrow Arauca River, and while crossing the border there is illegal, people were crossing back and forth with impunity.
What is this?
In the front is Venezuela.
Oh, that's Venezuela there?
And you can go for 2,000 pesos.
By the boat?
You move. 2,000 pay and no need present passport. Nothing.
Venezuela is a socialist state with the world's largest proven oil reserves. But while I was standing across the river, Venezuelans were protesting in the streets of Caracas. With a failing government, collapsing economy, hyperinflation, and 60 murders per day, they weren't concerned with illegal border crossings. So I became an illegal alien in Venezuela that day. This is a Venezuelan bar.
Nightclub?
If I'd wanted to get citizenship in Venezuela, I would have been out of luck because I entered the country illegally. In order to become a Venezuelan citizen, you have to first enter the country through a controlled border, get permanent residency, speak Spanish, and live in Venezuela as a legal permanent resident for 10 years. Then, if you're willing to renounce your U.S. citizenship, you can apply for Venezuelan citizenship. Venezuela is one of the countries that does not allow dual citizenship, and entering the country illegally makes it impossible to acquire any kind of visa. Arriving in Montevideo, Uruguay, I felt like I'd got on the wrong plane and ended up in Germany or Austria. Uruguay is in South America and separated from Buenos Aires, Argentina to the west by El Rio de la Plata, which means the Silver River. It's a Latin American country, but feels more European. About half of the locals that I met spoke perfect English as well as their native Spanish, and there were a lot of tall, blonde-haired people with blue eyes. Uruguay isn't some third world banana republic. These people are fancy. They use linen napkins and say fancy things like dressing on the side. And in typical European fashion, they have progressive ideas. Uruguay decriminalized all drugs in 1974. Nobody has gone to jail in Uruguay for drugs in the last 43 years because there's no criminal penalty for drugs. To my way of thinking, that's pretty damn progressive. But for somebody thinking about becoming a Uruguayan citizen and spending their twilight years chilling on the beach, taking the cocaine and smoking marijuana cigarette joints, they have to think again. It's not easy to join Uruguayan society. You'll have to live in Uruguay for 5 years as a legal resident before getting citizenship, and Uruguay expects you to prove your residence by documentation. They don't take you at your word. They demand unusual documents like a doctor's appointment slip or a library card, and they investigate applicants' claims. They expect you to prove that you are actually living in Uruguay. If you receive permanent residence, you'll most likely need a lawyer to get citizenship. This is why an Uruguayan passport is one of the strongest in the world. It's ranked number 25 by passportindex.org, 1 point above the UAE and 1 point below Vatican City. That completes the list of countries I've visited in my life. I've never been to Mexico, at least not yet. But you can't talk about immigration without talking about Mexico. And since I've never been there, I don't have any personal photos or video to share, so it's a good excuse to watch Janet Garcia tell us the weather in Mexico. According to PewResearch.org, Mexicans make up the majority of immigrants into the U.S., both legal and illegal. Mexicans usually travel to the U.S. for economic reasons, and Mexico's shared border with the United States makes illegal immigration a daily occurrence. But not everyone crossing the Mexican-U.S. border is Mexican. Many people from South and Central America, as well as other countries, traveled to Mexico to illegally cross the border into the U.S., but many Central Americans hope to find a better life in Mexico. According to a PBS documentary, Mexico has dramatically enhanced security on their southern border and is now deporting more Central Americans than the United States. Enforcement of Mexico's immigration laws at the southern border is at times brutal. Immigration between Mexico and the United States, however, goes both ways. More than 1 million Americans are living in Mexico permanently, and according to U.S. News and World Report, many of them are there illegally. Mexico has the same 5-year legal residency rule to obtain citizenship as the United States. They also require a test, taken in Spanish, to prove basic knowledge about Mexico and Mexican culture. Aspiring Mexican citizens will need to pass a background check and show that they're sufficiently integrated into Mexico's society. Unlike the United States, Mexico does differentiate between natural-born and naturalized citizens. There's a list, for instance, of jobs that are only available to natural-born Mexican citizens. Every country that I researched has in common that they all require that a person enter and live in their respective countries legally before being eligible for citizenship. I found no nation that has a provision in their law to allow people to become citizens after entering the country illegally, and every country has a penalty for illegally crossing their borders or living without proper documentation. Something that stands out is that if a country is economically healthy and providing valuable benefits to their citizens, they tend to discourage or outright prohibit immigration. Dubai, for example. But when a country is struggling, they look to encourage immigration, but only from people who can demonstrate that they'll bring foreign money into their economy, like Panama. But the opposite is true for immigrants into the U.S. A According to a recent study linked in the description, immigrants sent $70 billion out of the U.S. to Latin American countries alone in 2016. Rather than contributing to the economy of their new country, they're sending money back to their countries of origin. The United States, Canada, and the UK stand out in their willingness to accept immigrants who lack financial independence and demonstrate a likely need for government services. The U.S. immigration policy is nearly indistinguishable from every other developed country that doesn't blatantly discourage or prohibit immigration. On this, in my opinion, is why there is no honest debate about U.S. immigration law. There's only debate about enforcement of the existing law or the circumvention of the law through the use of refugee status. Because to have a real conversation about changing our immigration policy, we would need to look at the laws of other countries and make honest comparisons. And if we do that, we would find that ours is among the most liberal. Thanks for watching. Links to source material are in the description.